The warning lights filled Daewon's cockpit with red, flashing signals. His cargo ship shook violently as the solar flare's electromagnetic pulse fried every system he had. The navigation screen went dark. The autopilot died. Even the backup communications array sparked and went silent. No, 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 Daewon muttered, fighting with the manual controls. His hands moved fast across the panel, trying to stabilize the ship. Through the viewport, he could see the frozen moon of Valethi 7 rushing up to meet him. The endless white landscape stretched in every direction, broken only by massive ice formations and the constant swirl of snow. He was going down, and there was nothing he could do about it. The impact came hard. Metal screamed as the ship tore through the ice. Daewon's head slammed against the seat restraint. His vision blurred. The world spun. Then everything went still. For a long moment, he just sat there, breathing hard. His chest hurt. His left leg felt wrong, but he was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was alive. Daewon unstrapped himself and immediately fell. Pain shot through his leg like fire. He looked down and saw his ankle twisted at a bad angle. Broken, probably. He cursed under his breath and pulled himself up using the pilot's chair. The ship was a mess. The main hull had cracked open on the left side. Snow was already blowing in through the gap. The cargo bay in the back seemed intact, which meant his medical supplies were probably safe. Not that it mattered much if he couldn't call for help. He dragged himself to the emergency locker and pulled out the survival kit. Thermal blankets, emergency rations, a basic medical pack, and a distress beacon. His hands shook as he activated the beacon. The small device beeped twice, then showed a red error light. Damaged, of course it was damaged. Daewon sat down heavily, his broken leg stretched out in front of him. He was alone on one of the harshest moons in the sector. During storm season, no one knew exactly where he'd crashed. His ship was dying, and his leg was broken. He had maybe 3 weeks of food if he rationed carefully. The storm outside would last at least a month. The math was simple and terrible, but Daewon had never been the type to give up. His mother always said he was too stubborn for his own good. His sister Nari called it determination. Whatever it was, it kept him moving. He splinted his leg using pieces of the ship's interior paneling and medical tape. The pain made him dizzy, but he worked through it. The ship's hull groaned as the wind picked up outside. The temperature inside was dropping fast. Daewon sealed the crack as best he could using cargo netting and thermal sheets. It wouldn't hold forever, but it might give him a few more days of warmth. As he worked, he noticed something strange through the gap in the hull. About 20 meters from the crash site, partially buried in ice, was a cluster of large crystalline structures. They caught the dim light and reflected it in pale blue colors. They looked almost like eggs. Daewon whispered. He shouldn't go out there. His leg was broken. The storm was getting worse. He needed to conserve his energy. But curiosity had always been his weakness. Nari had gotten her love of xenobiology from somewhere, after all. Daewon wrapped himself in a thermal blanket and limped out into the freezing wind. Each step on his broken leg sent waves of agony through his body. The cold bit at his exposed skin. His breath came out in white clouds that the wind immediately tore away. The crystalline structures were definitely eggs. 6 of them, each about the size of his torso. They were beautiful in a strange way, with swirling patterns inside the translucent shells. 5 of them were intact and frozen solid. The 6th had cracked open. Daewon knelt down in the snow beside the broken egg, ignoring the pain in his leg. Inside the shattered shell was a small creature, barely the size of a cat. It had a long body with 4 legs and a tail. Small wings were folded against its sides. Its scales were pure white, almost translucent, and its eyes were a pale pink color. The creature was shivering. Its breathing came in shallow, rapid gasps. As Daewon watched, it tried to crawl toward the other eggs, but its legs were too weak. It collapsed in the snow. Daewon knew what this was. Valethian worms. He'd seen pictures in the colony briefings. They were supposed to be dangerous predators, highly territorial. The briefings had warned pilots to stay away from their nesting grounds. But this wasn't a dangerous predator. This was a baby, and it was dying. Daewon looked back at his damaged ship. He had limited food, limited warmth. He was probably going to die out here himself. Taking in another mouth to feed was stupid. Suicidal, even. The hatchling made a small, pitiful sound. Its white scales were already dusted with frost. "Ah, hell," Daewon said. He scooped the tiny creature up in his hands. It was so cold it felt like holding ice. "You're coming with me." The journey back to the ship took forever. His legs screamed with each step. The wind tried to push him over, but he kept the hatchling tucked inside his thermal blanket, pressed against his chest to share his body heat. Inside the ship, Daewon set up a small space near the emergency heater. He wrapped the hatchling in one of his spare shirts and placed it in a makeshift nest made from cargo padding. The creature's eyes opened slightly. Those strange pink eyes looked at him with what might have been confusion or fear. "It's okay," Daewon said softly. "You're safe now." He checked his rations. If he was careful, he could spare a little bit for the hatchling. The creature needed protein. Daewon mashed up some of his emergency meat paste and offered it on his finger. The hatchling sniffed cautiously, then licked the food. It ate slowly at first, then more eagerly. When it finished, it made a small chirping sound that might have been contentment. Daewon smiled despite everything. "You're welcome." He watched the hatchling curl up in the warm nest, its breathing already steadier. Outside, the storm howled louder. The ship creaked and groaned. His leg throbbed with pain. His distress beacon was broken. He was trapped with no way to call for help, but somehow, sitting there in his dying ship with this strange white creature, Daewon didn't feel quite so alone anymore. "I'll call you Hanul," he said quietly. "It means sky. Because you should have been flying up there, not stuck down here in the ice with me." Hanul chirped again, softer this time, already falling asleep in the warmth. Daewon leaned back against the cold wall and closed his eyes. He didn't know if they would survive. The odds were terrible, but at least they wouldn't die alone, and somehow that made all the difference. The storm raged on outside, burying the crashed ship deeper in snow. Inside, a human and an alien hatchling shared warmth in the darkness, two unlikely survivors clinging to life on a frozen world far from home. The first week was the hardest Daewon had ever lived through. His leg wasn't healing right. Infection had set in despite the antibiotics from the medical kit. Fever came and went in waves that left him shaking and confused. The ship's life support system was failing piece by piece. Each day was colder than the last, but Hanul was growing. The small white hatchling had been cat-sized when Daewon found it. Now, after just 5 days, it was as big as a medium dog. It ate constantly, and Daewon quickly realized his rations wouldn't be enough for both of them. On the third day, delirious with fever, Daewon had tried to teach Hanul to hunt. He dragged himself to the crack in the hull and pointed out into the ice. Small creatures lived in the frozen ground, tiny things that burrowed through the permafrost. He didn't know if Hanul understood, but the next morning he woke to find 3 small frozen animals piled near his head. Hanul sat nearby, its pale pink eyes watching him carefully. The hatchling had learned. It had hunted, and it had brought food back to share. Daewon had cried then, though he blamed it on the fever. Now, as he lay wrapped in thermal blankets with his infected leg elevated, he watched Hanul move around the small space of the damaged ship. The worm was graceful despite its size, careful not to knock into anything. It seemed to understand that the ship was fragile, that they needed to preserve what little warmth they had. "You're smart," Daewon said. His voice was rough from the fever. "Smarter than the briefing said. They told us your kind were just animals. But you're not, are you?" Hanul turned its head toward him. Those strange pink eyes held an intelligence that made Daewon's skin prickle. The worm chirped, a sound it seemed to make when it wanted attention. "Come here," Daewon said, patting the space beside him. Hanul moved closer and curled its long body around Daewon's chest. The worm was warm now, its body temperature higher than a human's. The heat felt wonderful against Daewon's chilled skin. "Good," Daewon murmured. "That's good." He'd started talking to Hanul constantly. It helped keep his mind focused through the fever. He told the worm about Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests. He talked about Seoul, where his mother grew orchids in her apartment. He described Nari's laboratory, full of alien specimens and research notes. "She'd love to meet you," Daewon said, running his hand along Hanul's white scales. They were smooth and cold, like touching polished stone. "My sister. She studies creatures from other worlds, but I don't think she's ever seen anything like you." Hanul made a low rumbling sound that vibrated through its whole body. It almost sounded like a purr. The days blurred together. Daewon's fever got worse. He stopped being able to tell what was real and what was hallucination. Sometimes he thought he was back home, arguing with Nari about her latest research project. Sometimes he thought his mother was there, touching his forehead and telling him everything would be fine. But Hanul was always real. Always there. Always warm. The worm brought food every day now. Small animals, frozen plants, even ice formations that contained nutrients. Hanul would push them toward Daewon's mouth, chirping insistently until he ate. When Daewon was too weak to feed himself, Hanul would break the food into smaller pieces. One night, when the fever was at its worst, Daewon's heart started beating wrong. Too fast and too slow. He gasped for air that wouldn't come. His vision darkened at the edges. Hanul went wild. The worm pressed its body against Daewon's chest, its warmth seeping into him. It made loud, distressed sounds that echoed through the damaged ship. When that didn't work, Hanul grabbed Daewon's thermal blanket and dragged it closer, wrapping them both more tightly. The warmth helped. Slowly, painfully, Daewon's heartbeat steadied. His breathing evened out. He drifted into an exhausted sleep with Hanul's weight solid and reassuring against him. When he woke hours later, Hanul was still there. Still watching. Still keeping him warm. "You saved me," Daewon whispered. "You keep saving me." As the second week began, Daewon noticed changes in Hanul. The worm was now the size of a large dog, its body long and serpentine. Small horns were beginning to grow from its head. Its wings, though still underdeveloped, were getting stronger. When Hanul stretched them out, they spanned nearly 2 meters, but it was the color that bothered Daewon. Hanul's white scales weren't normal. He'd seen images of adult Valethian worms in the colony database. They were supposed to be blue-black with scales like armor. Hanul's white coloring was a mutation, an abnormality. In nature, being different usually meant being dead. Daewon worried about what would happen if Hanul ever met other worms. Would they accept it? Or would they see it as wrong, as something to destroy? He found himself working on a protective covering for Hanul. Using pieces of his damaged spacesuit and cargo netting, he created a kind of vest that would shield the worm's delicate white scales from the harsh sun when the storm eventually ended. It was crude work, made more difficult by his shaking hands and poor vision, but he kept at it. Hanul watched him work with curious eyes. When Daewon finally finished and showed it to the worm, Hanul allowed him to put it on without resistance. The worm seemed to understand that this was a gift, that Daewon was trying to protect it. "There," Daewon said, adjusting the straps. "Now you're ready for anything." Hanul chirped and rubbed its head against Daewon's shoulder. The gesture was so familiar, so warm, that Daewon felt his eyes sting with tears again. By the middle of the second week, Daewon knew he was dying. The infection had spread too far. His fever never broke anymore. He was too weak to sit up without help. Even breathing was becoming difficult. He spent his remaining strength recording a message on his ship's backup data core. It might never be found, but he needed to try. "Nari," he said into the recorder, his voice barely a whisper. "If you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I won't be there for your graduation. I'm sorry I won't get to see Mom's orchids bloom this spring. I'm sorry for everything." He paused, gathering strength. Hanul was pressed against his side, watching the recorder with interest. "I want you to know I wasn't alone at the end. I found something amazing out here. A Valethian worm hatchling, white as snow, smart as any person. It's been taking care of me, keeping me warm, bringing me food, being my friend." Daewon reached out and touched Hanul's head. The worm leaned into his hand. "If anyone finds this, please know that these creatures aren't just animals. They're intelligent. They're capable of kindness. They're worth protecting." He coughed, pain shooting through his chest. "Tell Mom I love her. Tell Nari to keep studying, keep learning. And tell everyone. Tell them that even here, at the end of everything, I found something worth dying for." He turned off the recorder and closed his eyes. Hanul made a worried sound and pressed closer. "It's okay," Daewon murmured. "You did good. You tried. That's all anyone can do." But Hanul didn't accept that. The worm stood up, its body tense with determination. It looked toward the crack in the hull, then back at Daewon. Then it did something extraordinary. It started dragging the thermal blankets into a pile. It pulled cargo netting over the top. It created a kind of sled. Daewon watched through half-closed eyes, not understanding at first. Then Hanul grabbed him gently by the collar of his jacket and began pulling him onto the makeshift sled. "No," Daewon said weakly. "Hanul, no. It's too dangerous out there. Stay here where it's safe, but Hanul wasn't listening. The worm had made a decision. If the human wouldn't survive here, then they would go somewhere else. Somewhere warm. Somewhere safe, somewhere home. The storm hit them like a wall of ice and fury. Hanul dragged Daewon's makeshift sled out into the blizzard, its strong legs fighting against wind that could tear apart metal. Snow whipped around them so thick that Daewon couldn't see more than a meter in any direction. The cold was immediate and brutal, seeping through every layer of protection. Daewon drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was aware, he could see Hanul's white form ahead of him, pulling steadily through the storm. The worm's scales were already cracking from the extreme cold, thin lines of blue blood seeping through. But Hanul didn't stop. When Daewon wasn't aware, he dreamed. He dreamed of his mother's apartment in Seoul, warm and filled with the sweet smell of orchids. He dreamed of Nari laughing as she showed him her latest research. He dreamed of Earth's sun on his face, so different from the weak, distant star that barely lit Valethis 7. Time became meaningless. There was only cold and pain and the steady, determined movement of the sled beneath him. On what might have been the second day, Daewon woke to find Hanul collapsed beside him. The worm's breathing was labored, its body shaking with exhaustion. They were in the shelter of a massive ice formation that blocked some of the wind, but not enough. "Stop," Daewon whispered. His lips were cracked and bleeding. "Please, Hanul, stop, save yourself." Hanul's pink eyes opened. The worm looked at him for a long moment. Then it stood up, grabbed the sled harness, and kept moving. Daewon wanted to argue. He wanted to make Hanul understand that this was suicide, that they were both going to die out here. But he couldn't form the words anymore. His body had given up. Only his mind kept working, trapped in a shell of frozen flesh. The third day brought new horrors. Daewon heard sounds through the storm, howls and snarls that weren't made by wind. Other creatures were out here hunting in the blizzard. And they'd found the scent of blood. Ice stalkers. Daewon had read about them in the colony briefings. Pack predators that hunted anything weak enough to attack. They were perfectly adapted to Valethis 7's brutal environment. With thick fur and razor-sharp claws. There were at least 4 of them. Maybe more. They circled just at the edge of visibility, waiting for their moment. Hanul saw them too. The worm's body tensed, ready to fight. But it was exhausted and injured. One worm, even a growing one against a pack of ice stalkers, wouldn't last long. The stalkers attacked at dusk. When the weak sunlight faded to almost nothing, they came from 3 directions at once, coordinating their assault. The largest one went straight for Daewon, knowing he was helpless prey. 2 others flanked Hanul. The 4th hung back, waiting to see where it was needed. Hanul moved faster than Daewon thought possible. The worm spun, its tail whipping around to catch one stalker in the side. The predator yelped and tumbled across the ice. Hanul's jaws snapped at another, catching its leg and throwing it back. But there were too many. The largest stalker reached the sled. Its jaws opened, showing rows of sharp teeth. It lunged for Daewon's throat. Daewon's hand moved on pure instinct. He grabbed the emergency flare from his jacket pocket, the one he'd been saving for a rescue that would never come. His numb fingers fumbled with the activation tab. The flare ignited in a burst of brilliant red light. The stalker screamed and jumped back. The other predators scattered, their eyes hurt by the sudden brightness. Hanul didn't waste the opportunity. The worm roared, a sound Daewon had never heard it make before, and charged the retreating pack. The stalkers ran. They disappeared into the storm, their howls fading into the wind. Hanul stood over Daewon, breathing hard. The worm's white scales were torn in several places. Blood dripped onto the snow, freezing almost instantly. But it was alive. They were both alive. Daewon let the flare fall from his hand. He'd used his last emergency signal to save them. If rescue did come now, he had no way to guide them in. But it didn't matter. There wouldn't be a rescue. He'd known that for days. Hanul bent down and gently nuzzled Daewon's face. The gesture was so tender, so full of concern, that Daewon felt something break inside his chest. Not his body this time. His heart. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I can't do more for you." But Hanul just chirped softly and went back to the sled harness. The worm started pulling again, slower now but still moving, still refusing to give up. The 4th day was when Daewon finally understood where they were going. Through the storm, he caught glimpses of the landscape changing. The flat ice plains were giving way to rougher terrain. Rocky outcroppings pushed through the permafrost, and in the distance, barely visible through the blowing snow, he saw steam rising from the ground. Geothermal vents. Heat from the moon's core breaking through the frozen surface. Hanul was taking him to the worm breeding grounds. The place where volcanic activity created pockets of warmth in this frozen hell. The place where worms had lived for thousands of years. No, Daewon tried to say. Hanul, we can't. They'll kill you. You're different. They'll kill us both. But his voice was gone. The cold had stolen it. All he could do was watch as Hanul pulled him closer to what might be their salvation or their doom. The 5th day almost ended them. They were close now. Daewon could feel it. The temperature had risen slightly, from deadly to merely agonizing. The steam vents were visible through the thinning storm. They were going to make it, then the ice beneath them cracked, the sled tilted. Daewon felt himself sliding. There was water under the ice here, kept liquid by the geothermal heat. If he fell through, he would sink and freeze before anyone could pull him out. Hanul lunged forward, catching the sled with its claws. The worm's wings spread wide, trying to create lift, trying to pull them both back from the edge. For a moment they teetered on the brink. Then solid ground appeared under them. They were across. Hanul collapsed, its entire body shaking. The effort had costed everything. The worm lay in the snow, its eyes closing. No, Daewon said. This time his voice worked, rough and broken but real. No, Hanul. Not after everything. Don't you dare give up now. He pulled himself forward on his elbows, dragging his useless legs behind him. Every movement was agony, but he forced himself to move. He reached Hanul and pulled the thermal blanket over both of them. Stay with me, Daewon whispered, pressing close to share what little warmth he had left. Please, stay with me. Hanul's eyes opened slightly. The worm made a small sound, almost like a question. Because I need you, Daewon said. Tears froze on his cheeks. Because you're my friend. Because I can't lose you, not now. Not after everything we've been through. Hanul's breathing steadied. The worm's body slowly stopped shaking. After a moment, it stood up again. Slower this time. Weaker, but still moving. They traveled the last kilometer together, step by painful step. The storm began to fade around them. The temperature continued to rise. And ahead, carved into the side of a massive cliff, Daewon saw the entrance to the worm caves. Light glowed from inside. Not firelight or artificial light, but the soft blue bioluminescence of the fungi that grew in these caves. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Hanul pulled the sled up to the entrance and stopped. The worm turned to look at Daewon one last time. Its pink eyes were full of something that looked like hope. Then Hanul threw back its head and called out. The sound echoed through the caves, announcing their arrival. From the darkness inside, hundreds of eyes opened. Large, ancient, and completely alien. The worm colony had heard, and they were coming to see what had dared to enter their sacred home. Daewon closed his eyes. They'd made it. Against all odds, against all logic, they'd survived the storm. Now came the truly dangerous part, meeting the family. The warmth hit Daewon like a physical thing. After weeks in the freezing storm, the 15 degrees of the caves felt like summer. His body didn't know how to process it. He started shaking worse than before. The worms came out slowly, one by one. They were massive, each one easily 3 times Hanul's size. Their scales were the deep blue-black that Daewon had seen in the database pictures, looking like polished metal in the bioluminescent light. Their eyes glowed in various shades of amber and gold. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds filling the cave entrance, and every single one of them was staring at Hanul with undisguised hatred. Hanul moved to stand between Daewon and the colony. The small white worm's body was shaking with exhaustion and fear, but it didn't back down. It chirped at the larger worms, making sounds Daewon had never heard before. A language. Hanul was trying to speak to them. The largest worm pushed through the crowd. It was ancient, its scales scarred from countless battles. One of its eyes was milky white with age, but the other eye burned with fierce intelligence. This was clearly the leader. The old worm looked at Hanul with disgust. When it spoke, the sounds were deep and rumbling, making Daewon's chest vibrate. Even though he couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. Hanul was not welcome here, Hanul responded, its voice high and desperate. The white worm gestured toward Daewon with one clawed foot. It was explaining, Daewon realized. Trying to make them understand why it had brought a human here. The old worm's response was swift and brutal. It lunged forward and struck Hanul with one massive paw, sending the smaller worm tumbling across the cave floor. "No," Daewon shouted. The word tore from his throat, raw and furious. He tried to pull himself off the sled to get between them, but his body wouldn't cooperate. The old worm turned its attention to him. Those burning eyes studied him with cold calculation. Then it spoke again, and this time other worms moved forward. They were going to kill him. Kill both of them. Hanul scrambled to its feet and threw itself in front of Daewon. The white worm spread its small wings wide, making itself as large as possible. It was laughable, really. Hanul was tiny compared to these adults. One good hit would kill it, but Hanul didn't move. It stayed there, protecting Daewon with its own body, making sounds that became more frantic and desperate. The white worm wasn't just speaking anymore. It was begging. Daewon watched tears form in Hanul's pink eyes. The sight did something to him. Cleared his head in a way that the fever hadn't allowed for weeks. This creature, this beautiful, strange creature, was willing to die for him, just like he'd been willing to die for it back in the crashed ship. "Stop," Daewon said. His voice was quiet but somehow carried through the cave. The advancing worms paused. "Just stop and listen." He pulled himself forward using his arms, dragging his useless legs behind him. Every movement sent waves of pain through his body, but he kept going until he was beside Hanul. He put one shaking hand on the white worm's head. "Look at this," Daewon said, addressing the old worm directly. "Look at what you're doing. This one saved my life, brought me here through a storm that should have killed us both. And you want to destroy it because it looks different?" The old worm tilted its head, clearly surprised that the human could speak. It made a series of sounds that might have been questions. Daewon didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Skepticism. Disbelief. Why should they care about a human? "Because I cared about Hanul," Daewon said simply. He held up his arm, showing the burned patches where his spacesuit had protected the small hatchling from the sun. "Because when I found this one dying in the snow, I didn't see an alien. I saw someone who needed help. And I helped." He pulled off what remained of his jacket. The jacket Hanul had worn as protection. The jacket that was torn and bloodied from the journey. "Because Hanul dragged me through 5 days of the worst storm this moon has seen in decades. Because Hanul fought off ice stalkers to keep me alive. Because Hanul refused to let me die, even though saving me meant risking everything." Daewon's vision was blurring. He was running out of strength. But he had to make them understand. "You want to kill someone for being different? Fine, kill me first. I'm the different one here. But don't you dare touch Hanul. This one has more honor and courage than all of you combined." The cave fell silent. The old worm stared at Daewon with both its good eye and its clouded one. The other worms shifted, uncomfortable. They'd never seen a human like this before. Dying, barely conscious but still fighting, still protecting one of their own. Then something unexpected happened. A new worm emerged from deeper in the caves. This one was even larger than the scarred leader, its scales so dark they were almost black. But there was a gentleness in its movements that the others lacked. The new worm approached slowly. It studied Hanul first, then Daewon. Its eyes were a deep golden color, old and wise beyond measure. When it spoke, even the scarred leader fell silent and listened. Daewon didn't need to understand the words. He could see what was happening. This was the true elder, the grandmother of the colony, and she was making a decision. The ancient female worm stepped forward and gently touched Hanul's head with her snout. The gesture was unmistakably affectionate. Then she turned to Daewon and did the same, her scales warm against his frozen skin. She spoke again, longer this time. The other worms listened, their hostile postures gradually softening. Some looked ashamed, others looked confused, but all of them listened. When the elder finished speaking, she carefully picked Daewon up in her jaws, gentle as a mother cat with a kitten. She carried him deeper into the caves, with Hanul following close behind. The scarred leader tried to object, but the elder silenced him with a sharp sound. Whatever she'd decided, it was final. They descended into the heart of the cave system. The temperature grew warmer. The bioluminescent fungi grew thicker, casting everything in soft blue light. And there, in a massive central chamber, Daewon saw pools of mineral-rich water heated by volcanic vents below. The elder placed him gently beside one of the pools. Other worms began to gather, but these ones weren't hostile. They brought strange plants and fungi. They used their claws to carefully remove Daewon's frozen clothing. They lowered him into the warm water. The sensation was overwhelming. Daewon gasped as feeling returned to his limbs. The pain was intense, but underneath it was the first real warmth he'd felt in weeks. The mineral water seemed to seep into his skin, into his infected leg, into his fever-racked body. Hanul stayed beside the pool, watching anxiously. The elder worm settled next to the white worm and began grooming its damaged scales with gentle care. She made soft crooning sounds, comforting sounds. Daewon wanted to stay awake. He wanted to see what happened next. But his body had reached its limit. The warmth, the safety, the relief of still being alive all crashed over him at once. As his eyes closed, he saw Hanul's face one more time. The white worm was looking at him with such pure love and gratitude that it made Daewon's chest ache. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Then the darkness took him, but this time it was the darkness of healing sleep, not death. He was safe. They both were. Against all impossible odds, they'd found sanctuary. When Daewon woke again, days later, he would learn that the elder's name was Tae-Yang, that she'd lived for over 300 years, that she'd seen many strange things in her long life, but never anything quite like a human who would die to protect a worm hatchling. That in her eyes, Daewon had proven something important. That kindness could exist between species. That honor wasn't limited to one race. That sometimes the most valuable things in the universe were simple ones. Trust, loyalty, love, and the stubborn, impossible, beautiful refusal to abandon those who needed you, no matter the cost. Daewon spent 2 weeks in the worm caves, drifting between sleep and waking. The mineral pools worked their slow magic on his body. The infection faded. His broken leg began to heal properly. The fever that had nearly killed him finally broke. The worms cared for him with surprising gentleness. They brought him strange foods from deep in the caves. Fungi that tasted like mushrooms but were full of protein. Plants that grew near the volcanic vents and had healing properties. Small fish from underground streams that he learned to cook over the hot stones. But mostly they wanted him to talk. Tae-Yang, the ancient elder, would sit by his pool for hours, listening as Daewon spoke. He told her about Earth, about cities that touched the sky and oceans so vast you couldn't see the other side. About his mother's orchids, how she would spend hours tending them, talking to them like they were children. He told her about Nari, his sister, who had wanted to be a xenobiologist since she was 5 years old, how she would catch insects and study them, trying to understand how they lived, how she dreamed of meeting intelligent alien life and learning from them. He told her about human history, about wars and peace, mistakes and redemption, about how humans were flawed and violent but also capable of incredible kindness, about how they bonded with other species, taking in stray animals and treating them like family. Tae-Yang listened to everything. Sometimes she would make sounds that Daewon learned meant questions. He would do his best to answer, even though they didn't fully share a language. Somehow they understood each other anyway. Hanul was always there, translating when it could, helping bridge the gap between human and worm. The white worm had become something new. Not quite human, not quite worm, but something that belonged to both worlds. The other worms slowly accepted them both. The scarred leader, whose name was Kyung-ho, remained suspicious. But even he couldn't deny that Daewon's presence had brought something valuable to the colony. New ideas, new perspectives, new possibilities. On the 15th day, Daewon felt strong enough to work. His leg was still weak, but he could walk with a crutch the worms had helped him fashion from cave wood. He gathered pieces of his salvaged equipment and whatever materials the worms could bring him from the surface. He was going to build a communicator. One last try to call for help. It took 3 days of constant work. The worms watched with fascination as Daewon connected wires and circuits, testing each component. Hanel stayed by his side the entire time, bringing him food and water, making sure he didn't push himself too hard. Finally, on the 47th day since his crash, Daewon activated the makeshift communicator. He'd boosted the signal using minerals from the caves, crystals that the worms said held lightning during storms. It was a desperate gamble. The signal might not reach anyone. Or it might. "This is cargo pilot Daewon, ship registration Delta 749, he said into the device. His voice was steady now, strong. "Requesting emergency rescue. Coordinates. He read off the numbers from his damaged wrist computer. I'm alive. Repeat, I'm alive, and I'm not alone. He sent the message on repeat and waited. For 2 days, nothing happened. Day 1 tried not to lose hope, but it was hard. Maybe he was too far from the shipping lanes. Maybe his signal was too weak. Maybe no one was looking anymore. Then on the 49th day, the communicator crackled to life. This is Commander Jiwoo of the rescue vessel Bright Star. Day 1, is that really you? We've been searching for 7 weeks. Your family never gave up hope. Please confirm your status. Day 1's hands shook as he grabbed the communicator. It's me. I'm alive, injured but recovering. Commander, I need you to listen carefully. I'm in the Velethian worm breeding caves. Do not come in with weapons. Do not show any aggression. These creatures are intelligent. They've been helping me. There was a long pause. Say again? Did you say the worm caves? Yes, they saved my life. There's so much to explain, but you need to trust me. Come peacefully or don't come at all. Another pause, longer this time. Understood. We're 2 hours from your position. Day 1, your sister is here. She insisted on coming. She's been leading the search. Day 1 closed his eyes. Nari. Of course she wouldn't give up. Tell her I can't wait to see her. The 2 hours felt like 2 years. Day 1 used the time to prepare the worms, working with Taeyang to explain what was about to happen. More humans were coming. They would be scared. They might see the worms as dangerous. But if both sides stayed calm, if they showed trust, then maybe something amazing could happen. Taeyang agreed. She gathered the colony in the main chamber and spoke to them in her deep, rumbling voice. When she finished, they all looked at Day 1 with what he'd learned to recognize as acceptance. Kyung-ho, the scarred leader, approached him. The big worm studied Day 1 for a long moment, then did something unexpected. He bowed his head, showing respect. Day 1 bowed back. When the rescue team arrived, they did exactly what Day 1 had feared. They came with weapons drawn, energy shields up, moving in tactical formation. But Commander Jiwoo was at the front and she was smart enough to hold her fire. Stand down, she ordered her team. Lower your weapons. Commander, those things are intelligent beings who saved one of our own? Jiwoo interrupted. Lower your weapons or I'll have you on report. The team obeyed, though they kept their hands near their holsters. Nari pushed through the soldiers. She was taller than Day 1 remembered. Her hair longer, but her eyes were the same, full of curiosity and wonder. When she saw him, she ran forward. Day 1. She grabbed him in a hug that made his still-healing ribs protest. You idiot. You scared us all half to death. Sorry, Day 1 said, hugging her back. I was a little busy surviving. Nari pulled back and saw Hanul standing beside him. Her eyes went wide. Is that a Velethian worm? But it's white. I've never seen anything like it. This is Hanul, Day 1 said proudly. And Hanul is the reason I'm alive. Hanul chirped and stepped forward, studying Nari with curious eyes. The white worm gently touched its snout to Nari's hand, the same greeting gesture Taeyang had taught Day 1. Nari laughed, tears streaming down her face. Hello, Hanul. Thank you for saving my brother. Over the next hour, Day 1 explained everything. The crash, finding Hanul, the storm, the journey to the caves. He introduced Taeyang and Kyung-ho. He showed them the mineral pools, the bioluminescent fungi, the whole incredible ecosystem the worms had built. Commander Jiwoo listened to everything with growing amazement. This is first contact, she said finally. Real first contact with an intelligent species. Do you understand what this means? It means everything changes, Nari said. She was already taking samples, making notes, her xenobiologist's mind working at full speed. We've been alone in the galaxy for so long. But we're not. We never were. Taeyang approached the commander slowly. The ancient worm looked at Jiwoo with those wise golden eyes and made a series of sounds. Hanul translated as best it could, using gestures and simple sounds that the humans could understand. The message was clear. The worms wanted peace. They wanted to learn. They wanted to share this world with humans if humans could learn to respect it. Jiwoo knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with Taeyang. We will, she promised. I swear it. We'll do better. The journey home took 3 days. Day 1 spent most of it resting in the ship's medical bay, finally getting proper treatment for his injuries. But he insisted that Hanul stay with him. The white worm curled up beside his bed, unwilling to leave even for a moment. Nari visited constantly, asking Hanul hundreds of questions, studying every aspect of worm biology and behavior. Hanul seemed to enjoy the attention, showing off for Nari, demonstrating its hunting skills and intelligence. "This one's special," Nari said one evening, watching Hanul solve a puzzle she'd created. "Even among its kind, Hanul is extraordinary." "I know," Daewon said. "But it's not because Hanul is white or different. It's because Hanul chose compassion over survival, just like humans do sometimes." When they reached the main colony station, they were met by crowds. Word had spread about the cargo pilot who survived 7 weeks on Valethi 7 and befriended an alien species. Reporters shouted questions. Officials wanted statements. Everyone wanted to see Hanul, but Daewon only cared about one person. His mother was waiting at the docking bay, orchids in her arms. When she saw him, she cried. He cried too. They held each other for a long time while Hanul watched, making soft, happy sounds. The months that followed were busy. Daewon became a liaison between humans and worms. Nari led the scientific team studying Y-arm culture and biology. A formal treaty was signed, protecting the breeding grounds and establishing trade agreements. Hanul became famous. The white worm appeared in documentaries and news programs. Children made toys that looked like it. Scientists studied it. But to Daewon, Hanul was just Hanul. His friend. His family. 5 years later, Daewon stood in the observation dome of the new Joint Human-Worm Research Station. Below, he could see both species working together, building something new. Something better. Hanul stood beside him, now fully grown and magnificent. The white worm had found a mate, another worm who didn't care about color. They had 3 hatchlings. One of them was albino, with the same pale pink eyes as its parent.